Today we're going to be talking about how the tithe became defiled. Hi there, welcome to the Povertybreaker channel. My name is Francois, and today we're going to start our series on the tithe and how the tithe became defiled as seen in Scripture. Now, tithing is such a huge subject that I'm not going to spend too much time on the different facets of tithing and that sort of thing, but I do want to just talk about why the tithe became such a contentious issue. First thing I want you to realize is that the church generally, when it talks about tithing, it speaks of tithing from the book of Malachi, Malachi chapter 3. Now, the first thing I want you to understand is that the whole scripture in chapter 3 of Malachi is to do with what happened in the time of Nehemiah. We must realize that Nehemiah and Malachi were contemporaries. They were at the same time. So if you look at the book of Nehemiah, you will then understand why Malachi says the things he says within Malachi 3. To look at Malachi 3 without looking at its context can obviously cause anybody to use it for their own objectives. So we need to look at, first of all, where did this defilement come in? Now, we all know the story of Nehemiah, building of the walls and that sort of thing, and we also know that there was a lot of opposition that he had while building the walls. I haven't got time to go through all the scriptures. You can go and look up Nehemiah yourself, read through it. It's fascinating reading. But there's an interesting thing that happens in Nehemiah chapter 13. In Nehemiah chapter 13, Nehemiah, who was out of town, so to speak, he'd gone back to Babylon for a period. Nobody knows how long he was gone for. But when he came back, after the wall had been built and the temple and all that sort of thing, he discovered something that horrified him. And what he discovered was there was a man by the name of Tobiah. Now, Tobiah was an Ammonite. And if you understand Scripture, you will realize that Ammonites were not allowed to go near the temple, never mind into the temple. But Tobiah was related to the priest through marriage, and the priest, whose name was Eliashib, actually invited Tobiah into the temple and to actually take up residence in the temple. And where did he give him room? He gave him room in the storeroom, in the storehouse, where all the tithes and offerings were placed. Now, the interesting thing, if you do a bit of research into Tobiah, today in Israel, you can go to a place called the Temple of Tobiah. Tobiah used the money that was coming in from the Jews, the tithes and the offerings and so on, because he was in the very room where the tithes and offerings were kept. So he was skimming the stuff off there, and he went and he built himself a temple, and he built himself a castle. That is a historical fact. Now, if you look at the whole scriptures in Nehemiah, Tobiah was a clerk. Now, where could a clerk get the sort of capital to build two massive buildings in honor of himself? It's just not possible. So what was happening, and we're going to go into Malachi 3 next week, so that you can then think back to what you're seeing today and understand what absolute horror it was for the Jews to see that the Ammonite, this Tobiah, was living in the temple and the priest brought him in. It was horror of all horrors that this Gentile actually went into the temple and took up permanent residence in that temple. And when Nehemiah came back and he discovered this, he threw his toys out the cot along with Tobiah out of the temple and all of Tobiah's goods out of the temple, and he restored it, had it cleansed so that the tithes and offerings could come back in to its rightful place. But now put yourself in the shoes of the Hebrews, how do you think it would have affected you to know that something that was totally against the law was taking place and there was no retribution? It must have caused an absolute tearing in their hearts. Because you see, what happened is they used to come and worship God and thank God with the tithes and the offerings. And it was part of their lives. It was part of the joy of their lives, was to bring their tithes. It was a celebration. God is a party animal, and he loved it when they came and partied and brought the tithes and offerings. But then they saw that this heathen was stealing the tithes and offerings without anything happening to him. And what happened in their hearts is that they started seeing him stealing their stuff. And there was a shift that came in their hearts. Because before Tobiah, they were simply stewards of everything that God gave them. They were the manager. And whatever they wanted to do, they would go to the owner, to Yahweh, and ask Yahweh what they must do, and he would instruct them. But now they left the concept of stewardship and started seeing ownership. And that is where the problem came in with the tithing. Now next week we're going to look at Malachi and see what Malachi says about this. I hope this has piqued your curiosity, that you will come back next week and let's follow on with how Malachi put it and how it offended the Jews and to what extent it offended the Jews. And then we might start understanding how the whole tithe issue became such a contentious issue, when in fact the principle of the tithe was worship and thanksgiving. So thank you for watching. I hope that you will have the courage to come back next week and watch the next portion. Bless you. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like or to subscribe so that we can build a relationship. Thank you. Bless you.